A very good afternoon to everyone. Today we shall be discussing about the peptic ulcer disease. The peptic ulcer can be broadly divided into two types. One is the duodenal ulcer and another is the gastric ulcer. Now, the most common agent that causes the peptic ulcer disease is Helicobacter pylori, that is H. pylori. Helicobacter pylori, it mostly causes type B gastritis. Type B gastritis, and it is the most common type of peptic ulcer disease. Now let us see the microbiology of the disease first. Now Helicobacter pylori is a gram-negative coccobacilli. So coccobacilli means it can change its orientation from coccus to bacillus form. Another thing is that the Helicobacter pylori, it's a non-sporing bacteria. It's a non-sporing bacteria. Now what's the advantage of the non-sporing bacteria? The advantage of non-sporing bacteria is that once it is eradicated, then it can't come back. That means that antibiotics are effective in treating the disease. So we can use antibiotics for its treatment and it will cause permanent eradication. The second thing is that this Helicobacter pylori, it generally spread via the fecal-oral route. It generally spread via the fecal-oral route. That means the transmission and the rate of the peptic ulcer disease is more in the developing countries. As via the fecal-oral route, this disease get transmitted. That's why the rate and tendency of development of this disease is more in the developing countries than in the developed countries. So in India, the peptic ulcer disease is much more common. Now apart from the Helicobacter pylori, there are some other risk factor also that causes the peptic ulcer disease. It includes different drugs. Now what are the drugs that can cause the peptic ulcer disease? It includes the NSAIDs, that is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and along with there is corticosteroids. So these two drugs can also lead to development of Helicobacter pylori. Along with that, the chronic smokers plus alcoholic people. So smoking, alcohol. Along with this, the patient who are suffering from Cushing syndrome. The patient who are suffering from Cushing syndrome also have a high risk of development of this disease. Along with this, hyperparathyroidism plus the patient who are suffering from cirrhosis of liver also have a high chance of development of this disease. Now we shall be discussing about the most common agent, that is Helicobacter pylori. Now what happens? Helicobacter pylori loves to grow in an environment where there is acidic condition. Now we know that in the stomach there is presence of acidic condition. Now what the Helicobacter pylori does? Helicobacter pylori produces the enzyme urease. Helicobacter pylori produces the enzyme urease, and what this enzyme does, it causes hydrolysis of urea. And when the urease enzyme causes hydrolysis of urea, it releases ammonia, and we know that ammonia elevates the pH of the condition. It elevates the pH of the condition, and when it elevates the pH of the condition, then what happens? It causes stimulation of the gastrin hormone. So more amount of gastrin hormone will be released. Along with this, it causes stimulation to the parietal cells of the stomach. Now when there will be stimulation in the parietal cells of the stomach, it will cause hyperchlorhydria. It will cause hyperchlorhydria. So that means that more amount will be released. And along with the hyperchlorhydria, it will causes hypergastrinemia. Now in these patients where there will be hyperchlorhydria and hypergastrinemia, what should be the workup? What should be the workup to identify this condition in a patient? So the very first thing that we can do is the breath urea test. The breath urea test, and it's the most common test that we can do. It's a screening test and it has 95% efficacy. So breath urea test is the screening test that we can do, and along with the breath urea test we can also do the urease test. Now breath urea test and urease test both have nearly 95% efficacy, but one prefers the breath urea test rather than the urease test, because for the urease test we need to do the upper GI endoscopy. Upper GI endoscopy, and we know that for doing the endoscopy it's a tough procedure. So one patient will definitely don't want any invasive procedure to go with him, so patient generally prefers the breath urea test. So breath urea test and urease test, these are the common tests that can help us to diagnose the condition. And let me tell you, this Helicobacter pylori, as I mentioned earlier, it generally causes type B gastritis. So this condition, that is hyperchlorhydria and hypergastrinemia, these are the condition of type B gastritis. Now after doing the investigation, after doing the breath urea test, we after doing this, when it comes positive, and if you do the urease test, if it comes positive, then we have to do some medication. You have to give some medication to relieve the symptom. Now what shall be the medication that one should give? The very first thing, there are two type of medication that one can give. One is the triple therapy and one is the quadruple therapy. So triple therapy and quadruple therapy, these are the two things that one can give. Now what are the triple therapy? Now in triple therapy we use two antibiotics. We use the combination of two antibiotics, and along with the combination of two antibiotics we give PPIs, that is the proton pump inhibitor. What are the common antibiotics that we can give? First is clarithromycin and amoxicillin. So clarithromycin and amoxicillin, combination of clarithromycin and amoxicillin should be given for 2 weeks, and along with this we can give the proton pump inhibitor. So this is about the triple therapy. And we have the quadruple therapy, and in quadruple therapy we can give tetracycline, metronidazole and proton pump inhibitor, and also we can give bismuth. So tetracycline, metronidazole, proton pump inhibitor and bismuth, this includes the quadruple therapy. Now you can ask me that what's the importance of bismuth? We know that bismuth is a surface protective agent. Bismuth is a surface protective agent. So what does the surface protective agent does? It ensures that no more hydrochloric acid comes in contact with the ulcer and it aggravates the ulcer. That's why bismuth is given, which is a surface protective agent. Now one thing that can be mistaken, or we have to take in mind, that erythromycin can't be used in peptic ulcer disease. We have to keep this in mind, that erythromycin can't be used in the peptic ulcer disease. So that's about the case scenario of the type B peptic ulcer, which is much more common. Okay, and now let us understand about the type A peptic ulcer. Now this type A peptic ulcer, it is generally autoimmune in nature. Type A peptic ulcer is generally autoimmune in nature. So if it is an autoimmune disorder, then what is going to happen? There will be some preformed antibodies that will be formed. So preformed antibodies for parietal cell. So antibodies for parietal cells is going to be formed, and if antibodies for the parietal cell is going to be formed, then what is going to happen? There will be achlorhydria. There will be achlorhydria. That means what? No hydrochloric acid will be synthesized. Now you will be astonished by the fact that if hydrochloric acid is not formed, then how the ulcer can develop? Is not it? This type of question can come in mind, that if hydrochloric acid is not formed, then how the ulcer is forming. But in type B peptic ulcer, as we had seen, that there is excess amount of hydrochloric acid that has been formed. As a result, the ulceration is increasing. But in type A, there will be no hydrochloric acid that will be formed. There will be achlorhydria, but in the patient having achlorhydria, still the ulceration is forming. Now, if there is achlorhydria, if there is antibody against the parietal cell, then what is going to happen? The intrinsic factor will not be formed. And if the intrinsic factor is not be formed, that is the Cassel intrinsic factor is not being formed, then there will be less absorption of vitamin B12. And if there is less absorption in the vitamin B12, then you can also see in type A gastritis, the patient is also suffering from pernicious anemia. The patient is also suffering from pernicious anemia, and along with pernicious anemia, they can also complain of megaloblastic anemia. So these two common symptoms can also arise. Now this type B gastritis is generally gastric ulcer. The type B gastritis is generally gastric ulcer, and we have to keep in mind always that gastric ulcer is a pre-malignancy. Gastric ulcer is a pre-malignancy, that is it's a pre-malignant condition. So whenever we'll see a patient who is suffering from type B gastritis, that is gastric ulcer, then we have to do a biopsy to confirm the malignancy is present or not. Now, what will be the chief things in type A gastritis? It will be hypergastrinemia. Hypergastrinemia, but contrastingly, there will be achlorhydria. So in type A gastritis, that is in gastric ulcer, we will see hypergastrinemia and achlorhydria. Now let us understand in a chart format how to distinguish the gastric ulcer from the duodenal ulcer. So right here gastric ulcer, and here we are writing about the duodenal ulcer. Now gastric ulcer is generally more prevalent in the people having blood group A. So gastric ulcer is more common in patients who have blood group A, and duodenal ulcer is most prevalent in people having blood group O. So blood group O people is much more prone to develop the duodenal ulcer disease. Now this gastric ulcer, where this gastric ulcer is going to be developed? This gastric ulcer generally develops in the lesser curvature. In the lesser curvature of the stomach. Gastric ulcer generally develops in the lesser curvature of the stomach, which is adjacent to incisura angularis. So gastric ulcer generally develops in the lesser curvature of the stomach, which is adjacent to the incisura terminalis, and this is the part of the lesion where the lesion is going to happen, where the ulcer is going to happen. And duodenal ulcer generally develops in the first part of the duodenum, that is the duodenal cap. Now one important thing is that both in gastric ulcer as well as in duodenal ulcer, the patient complains of epigastric pain. Both in gastric ulcer, appreciate the fact that both in gastric ulcer as well as in duodenal ulcer, the patient will complain of epigastric pain. Now there are some changes in gastric ulcer and there are some differences in the duodenal ulcer. Now what is the difference? First thing, let us understand about the duodenal ulcer. What happens in duodenal ulcer? That suppose a patient is sleeping at 12 o'clock, 12 at night. Now after he is sleeping, after 2.5 hours, after 3 hours, the food is now not in the stomach, the food left the stomach. Now what happened? There will be hunger, and when there will be hunger, it will be associated with pain. So there will be hunger pain. There will be hunger pain in every 2 to 4 hours. So after the patient is having a meal, after 2 to 4 hours, immediately he will have the hunger pain. Now every time we can take deep meal. In a house we generally take meal 3 times a day, or 2 times, or maximum 4 times. So every time when there will be hunger pain, we can't take the meal. So the patient generally takes snacks along with them, and as the patient takes snacks along with them, we know that snacks have high calorific value. So ultimately what happens, the patient who are suffering from duodenal ulcer, they generally complain of weight gain. There will be weight gain in the patient who are suffering from duodenal ulcer. But there will be exactly opposite thing in gastric ulcer. The gastric ulcer, what happens, suppose there is hunger pain, there is pain in the patient, there is epigastric pain in the patient, and if the patient takes the food, as when the food comes, then more amount of hydrochloric acid will be synthesized, and it will ultimately lead to the condition that when the patient will be taking the food, the pain will aggravate. So what the patient will do, they will avoid the food. The patient will avoid the food. They will try to take the solvent type food. They will try to take milk. They will try to take soup, because soup, milk, they have low calorific value. They won't cause that much pain. But whenever they will take any solid food, it will aggravate the pain. So as they are not taking so much food, so weight loss is a prominent feature of the patient who are suffering from gastric ulcer. So in gastric ulcer, the patient will suffer from weight loss. So these are the two differences in epigastric pain, which is the chief complaint in both the patient. But in duodenal ulcer patient, there will be weight gain, and in gastric ulcer patient, there will be weight loss. Now when you will suspect a gastric ulcer patient, as I have already told, that the investigation of choice will be upper GI endoscopy, and along with endoscopy, a biopsy is must, as the chances of malignancy in gastric ulcer is pretty much high. As the chances of malignancy in the gastric ulcer is pretty much high, that's why we have to do the biopsy in the same patient. Now let us see the diagnosis. What are the probable diagnosis that we can do? So give the heading diagnosis. So in the diagnosis of the patient of gastric ulcer or peptic ulcer, the very first thing that we have to do is the urease test. First is we have to do the urease test, then we can do the test for Helicobacter pylori, test for H. pylori. Now the thing is that whenever we'll do the test for H. pylori, if it comes positive, then we can't distinguish between acute and chronic. We can't distinguish if the attack is acute or it is chronic. So this thing we can't do. So that's why the very most confirmatory test in this regard is endoscopic biopsy. Endoscopic biopsy is the confirmatory test that we can do. Now we can also do for Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori antigen in stool. Now H. pylori antigen in stool, if it is found positive, it only indicates acute infection or acute ulcer. It will never distinguish in the chronic fact. Similarly, we can also do the gastrin level. We can analyze the gastrin level. Now this gastrin level, this analysis is mostly done in ZES, that is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. So the gastrin level examination is done only in the ZES, that is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Now we already have discussed about the therapy. The therapy include the triple therapy or the quadruple therapy. Now if in triple therapy or in quadruple therapy it is not ensured, we have to look if there is any GI bleeding or not. We have to check if there is any GI bleeding or not. Now if there is GI bleeding, mostly in the gastric ulcer there is bleeding, and when there will be bleeding, the bleeding will be from the left gastric artery. The bleeding will be from the left gastric artery. So when there will be bleeding, when the patient will complain of this type of bleeding, that is bleeding of the upper GI tract, then we have to immediately send the patient to the department of surgery. Then the surgery people will do the thing. Now in very few cases we find there is perforation that is going on. The incidence of perforation is pretty much less now because of the usage of PPI. The PPI ensures that there is no perforation, but sometimes the perforation may happen. And if there is perforation, that what is going to happen, then the contents will leak through the foramen of Winslow. There will be leakage through the foramen of Winslow. there will be leakage through the foramen of Winslow, and the content will go into the lesser sac. And when the content will go into the lesser sac, it will lead to lesser sac peritonitis. It will lead to the condition of lesser sac peritonitis. So when there will be any suspected upper GI bleeding, then we have to immediately send the patient to the department of surgery. Now, one important thing to distinguish between the ZES, that is the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, is that in the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, there will be secretory diarrhea in the patient having peptic ulcer, and if he is suffering from ZES, then there will be secretory diarrhea in the patient. So this is what differentiates from the ZES, that is the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Now, in the time of conclusion, I must tell that to diagnose the patient, the triple therapy, which includes 2 antibiotics along with the PPI, or in the quadruple therapy, which include 2 antibiotics along with PPI plus bismuth, this is the treatment of choice. And also we have to ensure that the patient is not alcoholic, it is not chronic smoker, and also we have to look at some of the important markers of the liver, so to eradicate the patient from the cirrhosis of liver. So that's how we diagnose or treat a case of the peptic ulcer. Thanks for watching. Thank you.